What's up, Ragin Nation? How y'all doing? This is Alex, you watching the Ragin Ronin review, and last night I was fortunate enough to catch an advanced sneak preview screening of Man of Steel, and Man of Steel is of course the Superman reboot slash reimagination from director Zack Snyder, and Zack Snyder is known for movies like 300 and Watchmen and Sucker Punch, with the latter being his crappiest film to date. But when I heard that Zack Snyder was going to be doing a Superman reboot movie with Christopher Nolan producing and David S. Goyer writing, I felt that this was the dream team for a Superman reboot movie, because the last time we had a Superman reboot was from director Bryan Singer, and I felt that his version was vastly underwhelming. It was not exactly what fans were expecting for an updated version of Superman. Before I begin this review, I just want to let you guys know that Superman 1 and 2 from director Richard Donner are absolutely fantastic and superb films. And it was not only because of his direction, but also the outstanding performance from Christopher Reeve. Now here comes Man of Steel from director Zack Snyder, and here is my review. After watching Man of Steel, I've come to realize that Zack Snyder wasn't trying to repeat or emulate what Richard Donner was trying to do in the first two Superman films. He's making his own version of Superman and exercising his own creative freedoms, and it is all very apparent. And what he gave us in a nutshell is the origin story from Superman 1, the antagonistic element from Superman 2, and just condense it to a 2.5-hour movie with a rush story and a monstrous sized budget. Zack Snyder's creative freedoms allowed him to transform Superman from a superhero movie to an all-out science fiction movie with a lot of comic book style violence. What Richard Donner gave us was truly a superhero movie, but Zack Snyder's vision did not feel like a superhero movie at all. It was super, but there wasn't really any hero there. In fact, I didn't feel any sense of heroics or heroism. Essentially, what I felt like was that it was an over-stylized science fiction action movie. And which is totally fine, because like I said before, Zack Snyder wanted to totally reimagine the telling of the Superman story. With regards to the story, it is an origin story, but it is very different from the original. We're dealing with a lot of science fiction elements here, from alien worlds, alien creatures, alien spacecraft, alien artifacts, and alien technology. And even when the movie takes place on Earth, there are still a lot of science fiction elements in it. This movie has Zack Snyder written all over it, but you will still see Christopher Nolan's fingerprints on Man of Steel. The movie is very dark and has a very somber tone to it, and the first half of the film is told through various flashback sequences, which Nolan is known for, which makes the film feel very much grounded. It is also a very serious movie. There isn't a whole lot of humor in it, if at all, so it's very much in the same vein as the Dark Knight trilogy. But once the action starts, it's all Zack Snyder. But before I talk about the direction in the film, let's talk about the characters. You have Henry Cavill as the title character, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, Michael Shannon as General Zod, Russell Crowe as Jor-El, Lawrence Fishburne as Lois Lane's boss, and Diane Keaton and Kevin Costner as Superman's parents. This is an all-star cast. I found that every actor does a decent job in their performance as their respective roles. However, the one thing I found lacking was the charisma for Henry Cavill as Clark Kent slash Superman. And this is followed by the lack of chemistry between him and Lois Lane. In fact, there is no chemistry. Everybody else does a decent job, but make no mistake about it, Henry Cavill, while he does completely look the part of Superman, he is no Christopher Reeve. Michael Shannon is no Terrence Stamp, and Amy Adams is no Margot Kidder. There are times when the actors in a reboot movie really do justice to the original characters they play. For example, the characters in the Star Trek reboots directed by J.J. Abrams. Unfortunately, Man of Steel isn't one of those times. But I gotta say that it didn't bother me that much, because keep in mind, Zack Snyder was not trying to make a carbon copy of the originals. Now let's talk about the direction and Zack Snyder as the director for the reboot. This is very much Zack Snyder exercising his ability to blow your mind on a very visual level. What I find really fascinating is that it takes quite a bit of time for our character to become Superman, and that the action doesn't really kick in until the third act of the film. But the progress to get there feels rushed. It is not a very gradual process. It is not about a kid learning about his powers. It is about a man who knows he's already got them. He just wants to understand why, and the next thing you know, he's got a costume on. It just feels that there's no sense of real development towards getting there, so it feels kind of rushed. and then suddenly he's Superman. Now when he becomes Superman, then it's on. In fact, it's an all-out war. This is when Zack Snyder flips the switch on to fun mode. One thing that I love about Zack Snyder as a director is that he really knows how to stimulate our visual senses with mind-blowing, over-stylized action sequences. He always seems to do something different with each film that he makes, from fight sequences with super long takes to crazy camera movements and Hong Kong style inspired action sequences to just over the top super stylized sequences of cartoon violence. In Man of Steel, I expected to see the same style of action that he presented to us in his previous films, but it is completely different from what we're used to. His signature ultra slow-mo transitions are pretty much eliminated in the entire movie, and the entire film is actually completely filmed handheld style, complete with countless snap zooms, which give us a very aggressive look at the action. One thing that I noticed and that I really gotta point out is that Superman's flight sequences have a very violent feeling to them. He takes us along for the ride, but it doesn't really feel fun. In fact, it feels uncomfortable and a bit bumpy, but definitely not smooth. As for the action, it is crazy. Let's just say that General Zod, his minions, and Superman are pretty much invincible, and they can do whatever the heck they want to each other without any physical limitations. Remember that scene in The Matrix Revolutions where Neo and Agent Smith were going to fight for the very last time in the rain? Well, imagine that, but times 100. In fact, this is Superman on steroids. We're not talking about your typical superhero on supervillain action. We're talking about complete and total annihilation, obliteration, eradication, freaking Dragon Ball Z style, leveling freaking city structures. The action is just out of this world. And that is in fact something I find to be a very huge problem in the film, and that is the action is just a little bit too much where it's just mind-numbing. It was actually quite cool the first time you watch Superman fight his enemies because it's something fresh, it's something we have never seen before, and it's really quite spectacular. But once you've seen what they're all physically capable of, you feel like what follows next just isn't able to outdo what you already saw. So once you get to the final act and climax between General Zod and Superman, you kind of feel like Zack Snyder has just run out of ideas, and all that's left to do is just break things, anything, and everything around our two godlike characters. By the time they're done killing each other and there's nothing left to break, it kind of feels like you're getting tired of them throwing each other through buildings and immediately walking away from it without a scratch. And unfortunately, this is when the film has disengaged me. I know I'm not the only one that felt this way, because when I started feeling this way, my friend who was sitting next to me started looking at his phone to check the time. I feel that by the time we get to the third act, Zack Snyder is already dealing in excess. Make no mistake about it though, Man of Steel is in fact Zack Snyder's most action-packed film to date, but once it starts getting to the last part of the third act, it starts suffering from sucker punch syndrome. And that is when you feel that the action is getting to a point where it is meaningless. It's just too much, and it starts losing the audience because there's only so much that these two gods can do to each other. They're invincible, there's no sense of danger, and any action sequence is just so much more exciting when there's actually something at stake. Remember that scene in Spider-Man where Spider-Man had to fight Green Goblin and he also had to save Mary Jane and a cable car full of people? Now that is exciting, and that's the type of action we were missing from Man of Steel. This wasn't my only problem with the film. My number one problem with Man of Steel is that it was not a Superman film. This movie is Man of Steel, not Superman. In fact, it does a very poor job in capturing the essence of Superman and what he stands for. This Superman story that Zack Snyder gave us certainly lacks the heart that the Richard Donner films have. It's not about heroics or heroism. It's more of a selfish and self-indulgent film. It's about the Man of Steel, not a Superman. Let's just say that for a being that's supposed to save humans from disaster, this Superman did a really poor job at that. I don't think we're supposed to lose track of the casualty count. Remember that car chase in Transformers Dark of the Moon? Yeah, the Autobots didn't exactly save any humans from vehicular manslaughter. Well, the same kind of thing applies to Man of Steel. And speaking of heroism, I didn't quite find that Superman in Man of Steel to be that iconic in Zack Snyder's cinematic vision. One of the things that make a superhero memorable are scenes involving acts of heroism combined with a heroic sounding musical score. Unfortunately, I found that the score from Hans Zimmer is really quite weak. I mean, you have your Man of Steel theme, but it is nowhere near as iconic sounding as John Williams' original theme. And to top things off, his General Zod / Evil theme consists of nothing but ominous tones that are really quite forgettable. In fact, once you've heard the Man of Steel trailer music, you've pretty much heard the entire score. And that's all I gotta say about Man of Steel. With all that said and done, I do think that Zack Snyder did do an excellent job in giving us an action-packed, updated version of Superman. It definitely lacked heart and the essence of Superman, and our leads also lacked charisma and chemistry. Henry Cavill is just dull. And our antagonist also lacked character. Michael Shannon as General Zod is always angry. He cannot not be angry, and he's always angry at Superman. He has no vendetta with the humans. Terrence Stamp's portrayal of Zod, on the other hand, was always cool and collected, and he was always feared. And Feora in Superman 2 was always sly and cheeky. This new version of Feora is just a walking, talking bullet magnet. And they never really touched on Superman's weaknesses. I'm not talking about his physical weakness, but the weakness that makes him more human. Even though this movie is 2.5 hours long, his journey towards becoming Superman feels very rushed. Now keep this in mind, I only feel this way because I'm a fan of the originals and I'm comparing it with them. But if you can look past all these things, Zack Snyder has truly crafted an extraordinary film. However, I felt that even as a standalone film, it could have had a more extraordinary finale to leave a better impression on me. But I was thoroughly entertained from beginning to end, and it is a great standalone film and an overall movie if you don't compare it with the originals, and it absolutely must be seen on the big screen. If you have a choice, skip to 3D. The 3D sucks. In fact, Zack Snyder himself didn't have anything to say to encourage the audience to watch it in 3D. The 3D was an afterthought from the studios. I rate Man of Steel 7.5 out of 10. Definitely not the summer blockbuster that I expected, but still a very entertaining and exciting film. Prepare yourself for a Man of Steel sequel, also to be directed by Zack Snyder, and also keep an eye out for a nod to 300. As always, if you enjoyed this review, hit that like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like me on Facebook, The Ragin Nation, and also follow me on Twitter at Ragin Nation. My name is Alex Yu, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace. He doesn't just stick to one type of genre. He goes to every genre. We got sci-fi horror with Alien. We got science fiction thriller with Blade Runner. And of course, Gladiator.